Hey guys, and welcome to another episode in a video series presented by KupoCon, where I'll be exploring the Final Fantasy VII compilation lore and Easter eggs that appear in the remake. I'm MJ Gallagher, author of the unofficial Final Fantasy VII Novelisation, the standalone novel The Nibelheim Incident, which is now an audio series also produced by KupoCon, and the new book Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII. The purpose of this series is to discuss a lot of the detail hidden within the remake, and to provide a broader understanding for new and veteran fans alike. In the last episode, I examined Chapter 12, Fight for Survival, covering the defence and eventual collapse of the Sector 7 pillar. This time around, I'll be breaking down the first half of Chapter 13, it's self-titled A Broken World. The video will inherently include spoilers for this section of the game, but anything beyond Chapter 13 is minimal and mainly speculation. However, as always, if you're not familiar with the original story, there will very likely be heavy spoilers. And if you're new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Following their last gasp escape from the devastation of Sector 7, Cloud and Tifa come to, amid the rubble of what had been the Sector 6 slums gateway. It was impossible to see the extent of the destruction straight away in the corresponding scene of the old game, simply due to the pre-rendered backgrounds, but in the remake the player is afforded a very eerie glimpse of the missing Sector 7 plate, and the horror of what that truly means. The pair have been separated from Barret, but they soon find him nearby, crying out for his daughter Marlene, as well as their Avalanche comrades Biggs, Wedge and Jesse. It's a very powerful image, with Barret's anguish and desperation emphasised by his alternating screams and whimpers. One thing I personally felt further expressed his emotion is that he begins pounding the wreckage with his fist, rather than characteristically unloading a barrage of bullets as he does in the original Final Fantasy VII. It's so much more intimate and heartbreaking. I've spoken in previous episodes about how the remake has presented Barret's paternal side very well. He is not only a father figure to Marlene, but to the other members of Avalanche too. This is demonstrated once again in the way he comforts Tifa here, recognising his need to be strong for her, despite his own loss. The performance of John Eric Bentley, Barret's voice actor in the English version of the remake, is exceptional here. I've had the pleasure of spending quite a bit of time in John's company, and know how much he values his role as a father in his own life, which has allowed him to bring real depth to the character. On the road through Sector 6, Cloud, Barret and Tifa pass some of the survivors from the plate's collapse, again adding a new dimension to the aftermath that wasn't present in the old game. The fear and confusion are palpable, but there's a really great payoff with the rookie and senior Shinra soldiers, who Wedge convinced to open the gates. It was suggested these two perished in the original because they refused to abandon their post, so the way they denounce the corporation and acknowledge they can't allow rules and orders to dictate their life holds more meaning here. Another interesting question might be whether the crowd's presence here is simply to add detail to the remake, or if the actions of Aerith and Wedge in Chapter 12 have actually changed their fates. As the trio approach Wall Market, Cloud asks Tifa if she knows anything about ancients, referencing Sung's comment when they were on the pillar. Tifa is unsure, but Barret mentions that they come up in planetology books. He, of course, as the leader of an avalanche cell, is well versed in planetology, or, as it is known elsewhere in the compilation, the study of planetary life. The connection between planetology and the Ancients, the so-called original stewards of the planet, should already be fairly obvious to most fans, but Barrett's remark may also be a callback to when the party first visits Cosmo Canyon in the old Final Fantasy VII, where the player can learn about both the livestream and the Ancients from the Elders, specifically Elder Hargo. Cloud goes on to have another mental jolt, where he hears Sephiroth utter the line, "Within my veins flows the blood of Ancients. This planet is my birthright." Looking up, he then hallucinates the silver-haired villain, standing on the path before him. Sephiroth accuses Cloud of failing once again, which reinforces the insecurities the young man has of being unable to save his mother or Tifa from the legendary swordsman during the Nibelheim tragedy. Sephiroth's monologue about the Ancients, of course, is a recollection of something that was said during his descent into madness amid those events. As we eventually learn, however, these words were not actually spoken to Cloud. In this sequence, the camera momentarily switches to Tifa, who can only see Cloud reacting to the hallucination. This suggests the scene is more of an elaboration on its original counterpart, rather than a retcon, because the earlier version has Cloud collapse to his knees when he is overcome by the memory of Sephiroth's declaration. The player is not shown what's in Cloud's mind at that time, which is alluded to in the remake by seeing it through Tifa's eyes. When the three pass beneath the south gate to Wall Market, Cloud spies some Shinra soldiers patrolling nearby. Barrett queries their presence, mainly because Shinra have traditionally allowed the district to govern itself, ever since the pioneering days of the plate's construction. If you try to approach the infantrymen, you can hear them speaking with their officer about an ongoing search of the compound, but that the targets have likely escaped. This is a reference to Don Corneo. If the player visits the Don's sex dungeon in the original game, after the events of Sector 7's destruction, they'll find Koch tied up. Koch informs Cloud that Shinra troops invaded the estate because Corneo was suspected of leaking their plans, which is eventually why the Turks pursue him to Wutai. During this section, it's possible to speak with each member of the Wall Market trio, Chocobo Sam, Madam M, and Andrea Rodea. Interestingly, none of them appear to have any idea that Corneo knew of Shinra's intentions. Loitering on the corner of the main marketplace is Andrea, proprietor of the Honeybee Inn. He asks Cloud if he found what he was looking for at the Don's place, a callback to Chapter 9, then tells the ex-soldier to never let it go again. This is of course a little wink to Tifa and a possible romance between the childhood friends. Back in Sector 5, a crowd has gathered again beneath the Jumbotron of Centre District, and the breaking news report from Shinra Media can be listened to. Like in the old game, a degree of misinformation is being broadcast, but there are actually quite substantial changes. The previous version had the news anchor downplay the seriousness of the incident, claiming that thanks to the Shinra company's quick action, there were no civilian casualties. Anyone in the city who had personally witnessed Sector 7's collapse would have immediately known that was impossible. In the remake, however, the media outlet alters its strategy. Rather than tone down the effects of the tragedy so as not to frighten the populace, it uses the power of suggestion. It alludes to reports of gunfire at the pillar, and that there may have been potential structural damage caused by the bombings at Mako Reactors 1 and 5. Despite not directly accusing Avalanche of responsibility for the devastation, The tactic is enough to stir anti-Avalanche opinions among the crowd, which in turn will sow the seeds of anti-Wutai sentiment. This is exactly what President Shinra has been trying to achieve since Chapter 1. As the party approaches Aerith's home, Barret charges off again, calling out for Marlene. He bursts inside the house and gives Elmyra quite a scare, then sheepishly tries to explain himself. While all the main components are still there, the conversation plays out in a different order than it did in the old Final Fantasy VII. A prime example is that Barret waits until after Elmyra's story to ask about Marlene, whereas the remake, far more realistically I might add, makes it his priority. When he tries to rush upstairs to see his daughter, Elmyra scolds him, reiterating that she's asleep. Barret thereafter has to creep up the steps, a possible callback to Cloud sneaking out in the original game. When Barret returns downstairs, Elmyra confirms that she knows Aerith has been taken by Shinra. Although she briefly met Cloud back in Chapter 8, she appears to be quite reserved when talking about her daughter. In the old game, she freely volunteers the truth to them that Aerith is an ancient, but here she does not let her guard down until Cloud raises the subject, believing Aerith herself told them. This presumption opens up the conversation, despite it actually being incorrect, because it was Tseng who spilled the beans. It's also worth highlighting that when Elmyra tells them Aerith is not her daughter by blood, the camera cuts to a contemplative Barret. This is a reference to his own relationship with Marlene, who is of course the biological child of Barret's friends Dine and Eleanor, and whom he adopted after the tragedy at his hometown of Corel. As in the original, Elmyra goes on to tell the story of how she came to meet Aerith through a series of flashbacks. Interestingly, the colouring of these recollections is different from any other in the remake, and really creates an authentic wartime atmosphere. I'd be interested to know if the developers intend to use the same technique in future flashbacks, such as those relating to the Genova project, which occurred much earlier than 15 years ago. We see Elmyra attending the Sector 5 slums train station, which is a practical but significant change from the old Final Fantasy VII. In that game, she attends what seems to be, but is not 100% verified to be, the Sector 7 slums station. However, official compilation media such as the Remake's World Preview book does confirm it was Sector 7. This doesn't really alter much in terms of the story, but having Aerith associated with Sector 7 in some way might have helped to explain how she knows about the hidden tunnel beneath Evergreen Park, or why she has a degree of familiarity with the ghosts of the train graveyard. Experiencing the scene with Afalna, Aerith's real mother, in modern HD visuals was really quite special. It's a very short scene, but one that carries enormous weight in the compilation. Afalna only appears twice in the original Final Fantasy VII, once in the corresponding flashback, and then again in the secret videos at Icicle Inn, and is not seen in any other title. What has puzzled fans for years, however, is just what causes Afalna to die here. No explanation is ever given by Elmyra, other than that the pair had escaped from a research facility somewhere. Only one other compilation entry ever addresses the matter, and that is the episode Shinra chapter of the official novel On the Way to a Smile, authored by Final Fantasy VII's scenario writer Kazushige Najima. In this chapter, Tseng reflects on how it was the company's attempts to control Afalna by force that led to her death. This is not elaborated on, but it is suggested that the Turks themselves were involved, Tseng acknowledges they learned the hard way that the assignment required a gentler touch, which clarifies one of the key reasons behind the General Affairs Division's refusal over the years to take Aerith into custody against her will. For the first time though, a sizable amount of information about Aerith's childhood in the Shinra building was presented in the short story Picturing the Past, which appeared in the Remake's World Preview book, also written by Nojima-san. The nameless infantryman who narrates the story knew Aerith and Elmyra when he was a boy, because his mother was employed as the housekeeper of their living space inside the research and development floors at Shinra HQ. He describes Elmyra as being kind and always smiling, even though she was unhappy on the inside. She taught him a little bit about the ancients and livestream too, indicating that she was not restricted from doing so by the company. The story also makes reference to how Elmyra was taken to the laboratories almost every day, and would often come back drained or with signs of intense blood tests. So strenuous was this that even some of the researchers felt Professor Hojo was pushing her too hard. However, despite being held by Shinra for 7 years, it would seem that the final straw was the company's abuse of Aerith's abilities rather than her own. Picturing the Past details how the young girl awoke as an ancient by chance one day, drawing elaborate landscape images while in a trance-like state, which resulted in President Shinra establishing a special unit to go in search of the locations as possible sites for the Promised Land. Within weeks of this ability manifesting, Aerith was overworked and driven to exhaustion, and was even attacked by a Mako poison research patient called Liza, the one I mentioned in my Chapter 11 video. Elmyra and her daughter's flight from the Shinra building occurred soon after, so her overwhelming desire to escape can likely be attributed to the physical exertion on Aerith, the attempt on the girl's life by Liza, the realisation that the pictures were leading people to their deaths, or a combination of the above. As for how they got away, or what caused Elmyra's fatal injuries, that remains shrouded in mystery. In the present, Elmyra goes on to say Aerith used an expression at the time which sounded odd to her. That was, her mother had returned to the planet. Barrett, who again is familiar with the teachings of planetology, shows a degree of understanding here about what Aerith meant, and how it connects to the ancients. Like I spoke about way back in episode 4, the remake hasn't really explained by this point what the livestream or spirit energy are, so what might be obvious for veteran fans is unlikely to be for newcomers. Barrett's reacting but not passing further comment is a clever way of saving the details for a later point in the story, at Bugenhagen's planetarium or otherwise. As a side note, it is in the corresponding scene of the old game where the phrase "returned to the planet" was used for the first time. While this next observation is hardly anything new, it is important to highlight because of what it means later in the remake. Elmyra's recollections eventually turn to the day Aerith told her that her husband had died while fighting in Wutai, and had sensed his spirit travelling back to Midgar before it joined the livestream. The same thing happens at the end of Crisis Core, when she senses Zack's death on the bluffs surrounding the city, from her usual spot in the Sector 5 church. If she can sense death, perhaps she can also sense life, which is something that is suggested towards the end of the remake. The next section is pretty crucial when it comes to understanding the relationship between Aerith and the Turks, and I'll provide a comprehensive breakdown of Tseng's part in that later in the episode. Elmyra's final flashback concerns the day she learned Aerith was an ancient. Just as it plays out in the original game, the memory begins with Tseng's visit to their home. Aerith opens the door and immediately recognises the Turk, the explanation for which I'll come back to. There are a few things to point out about Tseng's aesthetics here. Firstly, his facial features and hair length are the same as his modern appearance, despite the scene being approximately 15 years ago. This is also true of the old version, but it does throw up some compilation questions. His voice is slightly lighter though, which I'll also come back to. Tseng goes on to refer to the Ancients as the original stewards of the planet, just as Barrett did earlier in the chapter, and describes how the Promised Land is considered by some to be a myth, and to others an allegory. An allegory is probably the more appropriate term, because Shinra believe the Promised Land to be a real place on the planet. However, as is taught by Elder Hargo at Cosmo Canyon, the Promised Land for the Ancients was in fact the afterlife, the life stream itself. Therefore, in the context of it being a location, the Promised Land simultaneously exists and does not exist. Afterwards, the Turk addresses Aerith directly, asking if she sometimes hears voices whispering secrets when she's all alone. This of course is likely to trigger a realisation for Cloud, who observed her behaving oddly throughout chapters 8 and 9. In addition, the original English translation of the dialogue did not specify that the voices were whispering to the girl. As such, the use of the term here may be more than a coincidence, given the nature of how she communicates with the mysterious spectres we've already seen throughout the remake. Back in the present, when Cloud asks why the Turks did not just kidnap Aerith, Elmyra reveals that they actually told her their plan would not work if her daughter refused to go with them willingly. It seems unusual that the organisation would have shared this information, but it does give Elmyra hope that Aerith is not being treated poorly by her captors. This creates the dilemma of her not wanting Cloud and the others to do anything that may put Aerith in danger, because she is terrified of losing her too. For veteran fans, this is all too poignant a moment, knowing Aerith's fate in the original game. According to the Tifa chapter in the novel On the Way to a Smile, it is these same three characters who come to tell Elmyra of Aerith's death after Meteor has been destroyed and Sephiroth defeated. Heeding the woman's request at this time, Cloud, Tifa and Barrett arrange to make their way to the Sector 7 slums to do what they can to help. I'd like to highlight at this time how odd it is that Barrett simply leaves Marlene sleeping, particularly that he doesn't even seek permission from Elmyra, a relative stranger, to keep the child in her care. A little oversight from the developers, I suspect, though he does promise Marlene they'll win this fight if you check on the slumbering girl before departing for Centre District. So, as promised, I'm going to close this video by delving a bit deeper into Tseng and Aerith's relationship. It's been no secret since the original Final Fantasy VII that Tseng has been a presence in the girl's life from her childhood. In fact, a mistranslated line at the Temple of the Ancients had fans believing for years that the two of them grew up together. But the Ultimani Omega later clarified that Aerith had known him since she was a kid, not since they were kids. Although that's open to interpretation, given Tseng's age has now been officially confirmed as 30, meaning he's only 8 years older than her. It's unclear exactly when he first visits Elmyra's home, because the details vary slightly across the compilation. In the old game, Tseng tells Elmyra that Shinra has been searching for Aerith for a long time, suggesting years have passed. However, the Turk's own account in the Shinra chapter of On the Way to a Smile indicates that the company never actually lost track of the girl, only that they decided to keep their distance for a while following the death of Ifalna. Despite his youth, Tseng was given the assignment of convincing Aerith to cooperate with Shinra. In the book's chapter, he describes himself as monitoring her for a number of weeks before she approached him directly, thanking him for watching over her. Tseng had not wished to deceive the girl, and so told her the truth. He was from the Shinra company and he wanted to talk to her about coming back. Aerith had run away in anger at that, which is why she reacts so badly when she opens the door to Tseng at her house. She already knows exactly who he is. Because we cannot be certain of when this scene takes place, it's difficult to pinpoint Tseng's age in it. That said, he would have had to be in his mid to late teens, if he is 30 at present, and was therefore 15 or 16 at the time of Ifalna's death. Joining the Turks so young is not unheard of in the compilation, as we learn in Before Crisis that both Elena and her older sister were recruited directly from the Shinra Military Academy, where their father worked as a firearms instructor. I commented earlier that Tseng's facial features and hair length are the same in the flashback as they are in his modern appearance. This is a bit of a retcon from the compilation. Throughout almost the entirety of both Crisis Core and Before Crisis, the Turk is shown to have a short ponytail rather than his trademarked long sleek locks. These games take place in the 7 years prior to Final Fantasy VII, but there is one story set much earlier. That is the special episode of Tseng, a chapter in Before Crisis that is nestled between the two halves of episode 22. Tseng is a rookie Turk in that tale, yet still has the same ponytail hairstyle. As such, while it isn't impossible that he could have grown his hair, then cut it again, not changing his character model for when he first visits Aerith's house was a development decision. And there's proof. In the Final Fantasy VII Remake Material Ultimania, so kindly translated for us by Twitter influencer Itakamochi, there's actually an illustration of a younger Tseng with shoulder-length hair. Co-director Motomu Toriyama is quoted in the accompanying text as saying they decided against using the design in the game. Instead of hiring other performers for this scene, actors such as Vic Chao were asked to add an edgy, inexperienced variation to his dialogue here. If you listen out, you can definitely hear the difference. As for why Tseng doesn't look as if he's aged in that 15-year time span, there's perhaps more to it than simple developer shortcuts. Since the Turk's seemingly miraculous resurrection in Advent Children, due to a mistranslation in the international version of Final Fantasy VII, which strongly implied he had been killed at the Temple of the Ancients, there has been a running theme in the compilation that Tseng is impossible to kill. His special episode in Before Crisis provides a major clue to this, because Chief Verdo rewards him for his bravery with a rare full cure materia. If the materia can completely heal Tseng's wounds, it might also explain his ageless complexion. And finally, there's no way I could speak about Tseng in this context and not reference how he feels about Aerith. As a result of his assignment to monitor and protect the Ancient, Tseng eventually falls in love with her, as confirmed by Reno at Gongaga in the original game, as well as a few awkward conversations he has with Zack in Crisis Core. Across the compilation, Tseng repeatedly insists on not having Aerith taken into custody against her will. Like I detailed earlier, The primary reason for this is that the company believes it needs her full cooperation to find the Promised Land. However, given his adoration for Aerith, it's also very possible that Tseng has actively sought to keep the status quo and secure her relative freedom. Until now. Well everyone, this has been my recap of the compilation lore and Easter eggs from the first half of Chapter 13 in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please be sure to leave a comment with any feedback or something you think I've missed. If you haven't already done so, I invite you to check out my own Patreon account where you'll find free downloads of my unofficial novelisation of Final Fantasy VII, the Nibelheim incident, and so much more. Subscribers also get access to a huge amount of original content as well, including project artwork, behind the scenes podcasts, or mythology and Final Fantasy articles, etc. And please consider picking up a copy of my new book, Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII, which is on sale now. But until next time, take care. I'm MJ Gallagher, in association with KupoCon, and I'll speak to you again soon.